Hi, and welcome to Terry Talks Movies. This time around, I got a couple of East Asian films for you. One from 1963 and one from 1974. One was made in Japan, one was made in Hong Kong. And the second one's a weird kind of hybrid movie. Partly a horror movie, partly martial arts movie. Very weird. And the first one is in a series that somebody in the chat during one of my live streams recommended to me. And, I'm always susceptible to its persuasion. And so I decided to give this one a go, and it's kind of fun. We're going to start with that one. And it's based on a series of novels that were very famous in Japan, featuring a character called Nomuri Kiyoshiro, who is a wandering ronin during the Edo period. And he's very unusual. He's mixed race. He's half Japanese, half something else. I never figured out what the other half was. And he's a wandering ronin who is very cynical about everything. He's cynical about the hierarchies in Japan. He's cynical about people who want to get rich. He's cynical about a lot of things, but he's also got a sense of justice and a moral compass of his own. And that made Kiyoshiro very unusual in the jidaigeki genre of Japanese film. In fact, there are a couple of movies made before this series featuring the same character. But in 1963, Daiei Films decided to make a series of movies with Kiyoshiro Nomuri in it. They ended up making 12 of them right up until 1969. And they starred an actor called Ichikawa Raizo, who was originally a stage actor. He did a lot of no plays and traditional Japanese theater, and then came in and started doing these jidaigeki movies, playing Kiyoshiro Nomuri. And the character is quite unusual. His friends are geishas and pickpockets and things like that. He's not part of the normal kind of social caste structure or class structure in Japan at the time. Ichikawa Raizo unfortunately died at the age of 37 of rectal cancer and was very much missed by the Japanese film community. He makes a really interesting character in this. People tell me that he doesn't really hit his stride as the character until about the fourth movie, which I'm going to watch soon. But in the first one, I kind of like him. He's very unusual for a Japanese martial arts protagonist. Now, because this was made by Daiei Films, it's kind of down from those traditional jidaigeki movies that we had where Akira Kurosawa was making them with Toshiro Mifune and all those other actors in it. This is a little bit kind of down market from that. So the movie structure is quite good. Kiyoshiro is wandering around where he's at a riverside tea house and he gets attacked by ninja. Good way to start a movie. Traditional ninja using shurikens and katanas and other weapons. Takes them all out with not too much trouble at all because he is like a master swordsman. And then he has a visit a couple of days later from a woman called Chisa, who is the servant of the head of the Maeda clan. She asks him to protect her from a Chinese man called Chen Sun, who is a master of Chinese martial arts and can even fight people barehanded against swords. Kiyoshiro agrees and agrees to do it, and he's kind of hot for her, and she's increasingly hot for him. And then he speaks to Chen Sun. He gets a message from Chen Sun and meets him under a tree and finds out that things aren't exactly the way Chisa has told him they are. And there's a whole bunch of backstories, a whole bunch of political intrigue there. There's a whole bunch of different groups vying for power in Edo, Japan. Interesting thing too is the actor who plays Chen Sun is Tomisaburo Wakayama. And Tomisaburo Wakayama is the protagonist in the Lone Wolf and Cub series of movies in the 1970s. Those crazy samurai movies where you have a lone samurai and his kid is in a little cart fighting everything. He's the protagonist of those. So it's kind of interesting that a decade later, this guy is like playing the main ambiguous antagonist. So it's interesting seeing him in this movie, which I'm not even sure I gave you the title of. It is The Sleepy Eyes of Death, the Chinese Jade. And the thing everybody's looking for, the Maltese Falcon in this movie, is a Chinese jade statue in which is an invoice that proves that one of the people is working against the shogun and working against the emperor. And so things aren't going to go well if that invoice gets out. So there's lots and lots of those intrigues in this movie. And loyalties shift depending on what's found out about not only the real circumstances of what's happening, but the real history of a number of the characters. And while I was watching this, something occurred to me that if you're looking at the movies of another culture in the past, and very often I do, you learn a lot more watching the kind of second tier, the B pictures of that culture at that particular time than you do watching the A pictures that have got a little bit of a shine on the apple. The B pictures have an interesting kind of griminess and grimness about them, which I really appreciate. And Slow Eyes of Death 1 has that. They do a lot with interior sets. They do a lot with primary color lighting. There's a room where one of the villains is hiding and has been since he faked his death. And the room is situated beneath the surface of a river. And to demonstrate that, they don't build something and slide it into the water. They have windows that are showing a kind of murky greenish light. And so all of the color palette goes to green as the hero is meeting this guy in this underwater room. It suggests something that the budget couldn't cover, and it suggests it in a very vivid and visual way. And I like that. I like the way improvisation is used to make up for limitations of budget and limitations of the ability to build something. Building a room underneath the river is not easy. Not even sure if it's ever been done very much, but this movie suggests that really successfully. There's a little bit of dialogue about this room's under the river. And yes, it is. I built it specifically to hide from my enemies. Daiei did a lot of that where they combine locations with studio sets very, very well. The transitions are really interesting. Now, as far as the martial arts fight scenes are concerned, they're very competent. They're not like Akira Kurosawa, Seven Samurai, Sanjuro Yojimbo level fights, but they do convey what they're supposed to convey. And the special sword technique that the hero has is really interesting and really visual. And then suddenly you realize this guy is unbeatable if he uses this technique. Meanwhile, the Chinese guy, Chen Sun, also has a technique where he can capture a sword between the palms of his hands. And so the two of them have a battle with consequences. And I like that. I like the idea of these two guys going up against each other almost as a bet, and the loser has to do what the other guy says and has to follow an instruction that the winner gives them. It's not like life and death stakes in that particular fight, but it does give you the picture of the moral integrity of the antagonists, just leaning into that subtlety in this, which is basically a B-grade jidaigeki movie, really works. And I want to see more of this Sleepy Eyes of Death movies because I've got a feeling the series is going to reward me if I do. The first movie in a series like this, particularly a B picture, is always a little rough around the edges. They're still figuring things out. I'm looking forward to, I think I've got the fourth one at the moment, and I'm going to watch that one and just kind of jump through a few of them to see whether I like the series itself. There was a Nomuri Kuroshio TV series in the 1970s as well, and that's on YouTube. And the whole series is there with subtitles. And it's got a lot of the same feel of this movie series. But the movie directed by Takuzo Tanaka worked for me. I wasn't going in with an expectation of Kurosawa level kind of professionalism, level of production value. But it works. I mean, it's not a particularly long movie. It runs 82 minutes. It does what it needs to do. The plot lines are full of unexpected turns and unexpected revelations. And even though the protagonist is cynical and borderline depressed most of the time, and very much a polar opposite to all of the other characters who are completely within the kind of moral structure of the society, more or less, makes it interesting. Having a very, very outsider as your Ronin protagonist really works. So I suggest you check that one out. Ichikawa Raizo, even though he wasn't trained in being a jidaigeki guy, does a good job as a character. It gives it a uniqueness and a distance from mainstream society that I really appreciated. Next one I went for, I saw in the cinema when it came out because 1974, any genre movie that was hitting the cinemas, I was there. I would finish work, take a train into the city, and just go to town. I was like 15, 16 at the time. And I'd just go to town and watch as many movies as I could before the movie shut and I had to go home. And I saw the Hammer Shaw Brothers collaboration, co-production, The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires, which may have been one of the last Hammer vampire movies. I could be wrong, but it's right up there. It was directed by Roy Ward Baker, who had worked with Hammer a lot. But it wasn't only directed by him, because the martial arts scenes were directed by Chinese Jade, a Chinese martial arts director who was really good at what he did. He did mostly martial arts, wuxia, kung fu movies. And because kung fu movies were the flavor of the month in England and America at the time, Hammer decided to go over and talk to the Shaw Brothers and make 2 movies in collaboration with them. The other one they made was a contemporary action thriller called Shutter, which starred Stuart Whitman, Peter Cushing, who is also in The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires, and Anton Diffring, which I kind of like. I saw that one too. That one was directed by Michael Carreras of Hammer Films, and Monty Helmet was also known as Call Him Mr. Shatter. I kind of like that one, and both The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires and Shatter feel like alternate universe Hammer films. They offered the role of Dracula in this movie to Christopher Lee, who said nah. But Peter Cushing agreed to play Van Helsing again. Peter Cushing had nursed his wife through her terminal illness, and she died at this stage. And he was very depressed, and he wasn't sure he could work. He was going through a great crisis of faith about his own skills and talent. And of course, he was grieving as well. And Christopher Lee said to him, don't take this. This is not for you. And he said, I feel I've got to work. I really want to work on this. And he was still going through that grief process when he made this film. And he does a good job playing Van Helsing, even though people say on set he was still quite depressed. He delivers the same character we know from his previous Dracula movies very effectively in this whole new context. The film starts in 1804, and a Chinese wizard basically travels to Transylvania and Castle Dracula and asks Dracula to help him resurrect the 7 golden vampires in his province in China so they can stop the people living there from taking over from the vampires. The vampires rule the province. Now, Dracula in this case is played by an actor called John Forbes Robinson. His voice was dubbed by another actor, but he's Timu Dracula for Hammer. It really isn't. He's the only other person who played Dracula in a Hammer movie, apart from Christopher Lee. And to be honest, he doesn't deliver. He looks like a middle-level bureaucrat. He doesn't have the aristocratic bearing that Christopher Lee brought to Dracula. Well, we only see him in a couple of scenes, one at the start and one at the end. So it doesn't really matter that he doesn't have anywhere near the riz that Christopher Lee had. And the Chinese wizard goes there, asks for Dracula's help and goes, Dracula goes, I don't help people out. He then takes on the form of that Chinese wizard and travels to China and resurrects the 7 golden vampires for his own purposes. So we zip pan to a century later in 1904. Van Helsing is lecturing about vampires to a university in China. And the professors at the university just say, that's mythology, it's not true. It's not anything real about it. Go home. They're telling Van Helsing to go home, even though he's given them chapter and verse on vampiric lore, and he's done a bit of research about Chinese vampires. And unfortunately, in this movie, they don't use Zheng She, the Chinese hopping vampires. These are more ugly for a start, but these vampires are very much in a different tradition than the Chinese hopping vampires we know from movies like Mr. Vampire and Jitters and other films like that. After his lecture, Van Helsing meets a young man called Si Ching, played by David Chung, who had worked with the martial arts director of this film, Chang Chi, a lot. He was like the go-to guy for Chang Chi movies. And he tells him that vampires are real and that his village has been taken over by vampires. And that he and his brothers and his sister are willing to escort Van Helsing and Van Helsing's son Leland, played by Robin Stewart, to fight the vampires and defeat them and get the province back to the people. On the way, they meet a wealthy woman called Vanessa Buren, played by Julie Edge, who decides she's going to finance their expedition to this village as long as she can come along. She's an adventuress. Leland and Vanessa Van Buren are attacked by the Tongs in Chongqing, the city they're in, and we get a bit of a martial arts stuff, and we find a couple of the brothers of Si Cheng, one of whom's a bowman, and the other one fights with 2 axes. Each of the family members have different weapons. One's got a pole with a spike on the end of a silver pole. Others fight with swords and knives and things like that. So it's kind of like a D&D party where everybody has a different skill set. They travel to the countryside, they get attacked by a bunch of vampires that are sent from the village to stop them, and then they eventually get to the village, which is in ruins, and they fortify themselves and meet up for a final battle with not only the vampires, but the vampires and Dracula raise the dead from the local graveyard. And so you've got a whole bunch of kung fu zombies to deal with, apart from the 7 golden vampires, of whom there's only 6 left. One of them got knocked off by somebody who escaped the village. This is a weird mashup between wuxia movies and Hammer horror films. And it's not really solidly bedded down in a way that's totally satisfying, but it is fun. The wuxia scenes are great. The stunt work's fantastic. There's a couple of fire stunts in there. There's no wire work, but there's a lot of bouncing off trampolines and things like that. The English crews and the Hong Kong crews didn't get along very well. Roy Ward Baker didn't like working with the Hong Kong people, most of whom didn't speak English. He didn't like the fact that the actors and the extras and the crew were spitting on set. Very much a cultural clash there. It's got enough of that Hong Kong supernatural action film magic. You got Peter Cushing anchoring the other side of it, the traditional Hammer stuff. Robin Stewart playing his son is kind of okay. Julie Edge is very beautiful, does a reasonable job playing the millionairess. David Chung, who I think may have been reciting his dialogue phonetically. I could be wrong, but it sounds a little bit like that. He's got a lot of charisma and is really good in his scenes. And the endless vampires and the endless kind of zombie hordes make this work. The Dracula disintegration scene at the end is really good, and it harks back to the 1958 Dracula with Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing, and has that same kind of drying out and disintegrating to dust kind of vampire ending, and I appreciated that. This one a lot of people don't like. They really dismiss it as a part of Hammer's filmography, but for me it works. Was Hammer chasing a trend? Yeah. But it was also Hammer taking a chance to see what else is out there and see ways to make money. Neither The Legend of the 7 Golden Vampires or Shatter made money. They made a loss for both studios. But I kind of admire people stepping out of their comfort zone and trying something different. And these movies, in the hindsight of 50 years later, do have a lot going for them. They're entertaining. More maybe The Legend of the 7 Golden Vampires because of the action scenes. And they are very much 1970s movies. If for some reason someone was to do a remake of it, The Legend of the 7 Golden Vampires, I think, would have bedded down a lot of the characters better. And the action scenes would have been a little bit crisper, because I think there was some interference from the English side of things in the way some of the action scenes were done, and they were very much outside their comfort zone. But you got a Hong Kong action director like Chang Chi, who does really good stunt work and really good kung fu work. You really got to let them have their head. And Roy Ward Baker said he was glad he didn't have to do the action scenes, which probably is why he was always a mid-tier director. He wasn't willing to learn new things and learn new techniques and learn new ways of telling stories. He just wanted to get the job done. And there's probably a lot of racism as well, looking down on the Hong Kong crews and looking down on the Hong Kong way of doing things. There are things like all of the dialogue was ADR'd in post, because if you record the dialogue live in a Hong Kong action film in the 1970s, you're inevitably going to get traffic noise and aeroplane sounds in the background. And so they couldn't really do that. And as a practical measure, everything was all the sound was recorded ADR. after the fact. And the English side of it, the Hammer side of it, had trouble adapting to that. But you should check out The Legends of the Seven Golden Vampires. You should also check out The Sleepy Eyes of Death, The Chinese Jade. Both of them are fun. Both of them are good action films. And both of them, you're required to kind of step outside your comfort zone when you hear the name Hammer. And step outside your comfort zone when you're thinking of jidaigeki movies. Because, yeah, it isn't a Kurosawa film, but Sleepy Eyes of Death 1 is really interesting and is somewhat different. So I forgot who told me about the Sleepy Eyes of Death in the chat, but whoever it is, thank you very much for that. Enjoyed the movie thoroughly. I'm going to dip further into the series and just see where it goes for me. And meanwhile, The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires, yeah, there is a little bit of that nostalgic tingle about it, but I watched it so long ago that I can reevaluate it now in a totally different mind space and appreciate its virtues and its limitations. So that's it for this time around. Thanks a lot for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, leave a comment, tell me whether you've seen other of these movies and any other movies like them you'd suggest for me, because I'll tell you if I've already seen them, but I'm getting more and more good suggestions from comments and chat, which take me down beautiful rabbit holes. You can become a channel member on YouTube. You can donate through YouTube, or you can become a patron at patreon.com/TerryTalksMovies. And YouTube members and Patreon supporters are in the draw for the 24 movies I'm giving away at the end of my reverse advent calendar in December. And there are some really good movies in there. So until next time, I've got Science Fiction Saturday. Watch some good movies, watch some bad movies. Watch some really cool East Asian action films. They're never not fun. And I'll catch you next time.